When Smash Ultimate released, the main selling point of the game's marketing was that every character from previous games would be returning, along with a handful of new characters which, for the most part, were chosen due to a high fan demand to see them be playable. Whilst this usually leads to questions on who should be added next time, I thought to instead look at the likely follow-up question. Who are the characters that were considered to be added at any point in the series, but for one reason or another were not only rejected, but would never even get the chance to participate in a future entry? Now, I only really have two rules for what characters I'll be covering for this video. First is that we need definitive evidence, either within the game's files or from interviews with Sakurai, that the character in question was actually seriously considered to be added. So basically, no rumored or hoax characters like Tone and Rayman, or characters Sakurai has only mentioned in passing as potential additions like Makarota and James Bond. And second, we will not be covering characters that were scrapped, but then got added into a later entry. For example, whilst Bowser, Ganondorf, DDD and Marth were all considered but got scrapped for Smash 64, they don't count for this video as they were all later added in either Melee or Brawl. With all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the various fighters and characters that were almost in Smash. Now, I don't think you'll be too shocked to hear that most of the characters that were cut from Smash 64 were brought back for later entries, as given this was the start of the series, most of the rejects were incredibly obvious picks that they just didn't have the development time to include the first time around, mostly being major antagonists from some of Nintendo's most popular franchises. Because of that, we only really have one rejected character from this game, along with two others that come with an asterisk. To get the two technicalities out of the way, apparently an early idea for Fox was that instead of getting a set of alternate colors like in the final game, he instead was going to get a set of alternate costumes based on the other members of Star Fox, meaning that on top of getting Falco a game early, we would have also been able to play as both Peppy and Slippy. The reason behind this idea getting dropped was due to the feeling that Fox's moveset didn't really fit Slippy, and since it wouldn't really make sense to have every member except him, the whole idea was cut. Now, whilst that doesn't really count as a cut character per se, unless you're one of those people who considers Alph and the Koopalings as completely separate characters to Olimar and Bowser Jr., there is one actual character to talk about with the Pokemon Clefairy, who was mainly considered due to being a Pokemon that featured a similar build and could reuse animations from Kirby. If that description sounds incredibly familiar, that's because that is also the exact reason as to why Jigglypuff was added. Her getting picked over Clefairy due to her build being more similar to Kirby, her animations better fitting Kirby due to being the ballooned Pokemon, along with having a fairly popular appearance in the anime at the time, with Clefairy having to settle for a role as a Pokeball Pokemon. So overall, nothing too interesting from 64, just scrapped alternate costumes for Fox and a second candidate for a semi-clone of Kirby. Luckily, this is just the start and things will get more interesting as we go. Now, whilst Melee does have a good handful of cut characters, mostly due to the game's incredibly short development time, given that most of these either would show up later or don't have confirmation they were seriously considered, we really only have one considered character and one amorphous blob of various characters that were considered for the same role. For the latter, I'm specifically talking about the role of being a fighter, which originates from an early one-off NES game, which is a job that was ultimately given to the Ice Climbers, who have been a mainstay in the series since, only disappearing in Smash 4 due to 3DS limitations, with their inclusion also likely influencing the decision to add characters like Pit, Rob, and Duck Hunt. You can potentially thank the Ice Climbers for the existence of Kid Icarus Uprising. Now, whilst we've never gotten a full list of every character that was considered, Sakurai did share at least 4 of the characters that Ice Climbers managed to beat out, with the Balloon Fighter from Balloon Fight, the Urban Champion Fighter from Urban Champion, Bubbles from Clue Clue Land, and an Excite Bike Racer from Excite Bike. For the reasons why these guys lost out to the Ices, they felt Balloon Fire would be left completely useless if his balloons were popped, Urban Champion had an insanely limited moveset of only being able to walk forward and punch, they had no ideas of what Bubbles' moveset would even be, and they couldn't think of a believable way for the Excite Bike Racer to jump. As for the other scrap fire that was considered, we have Ayumi Tachibana from the Famicom Detective Club series, which, for those unfamiliar, are a duology of mystery games for the NES that only released in Japan, with Tachibana being the series' female lead. And unfortunately, it was that only released in Japan part that doomed her, as she ended up getting scrapped due to the belief that both she and her series were too obscure for anyone outside Japan to have any idea who they were. Now, whilst you may argue that's not the best reason due to Marth and Roy being in the game, despite Fire Emblem still being a Japan exclusive series at the time, that does ignore the fact that both of them were developed with the idea that they were only going to be in the Japanese version of Melee, and would be taken out for the international release, with them only being kept in due to the game's localization team taking a liking to them, meaning they got insanely lucky. Plus, on top of that, Fire Emblem was already a full-fledged series with 5 games, along with Roy being added to advertise the then upcoming 6th game. Meanwhile, Famicom Detective Club was effectively just 2 NES games that got re-released multiple times, and 1 broadcast that was exclusive to a Japan-only Super Nintendo add-on. Luckily, things have changed recently, as the series has not only seen release outside Japan with the Switch remakes of the first 2 games in 2021, but the system also saw a brand new entry with 2024's Emio the Smiling Man, meaning that Ayumi arguably has a better chance to be added now. Whether they actually will consider revisiting the idea is another story, but it's nice to finally come across at least one character who has somewhat of a chance of being added. Brawl is probably the Smash entry most synonymous with scrapped characters, which is mostly thanks to the existence of the Forbidden 7, a group of fighters who, despite getting removed, still have some references to them within the game's files. Luckily, we'll be ignoring most of these, as 3 of them are veterans from Melee, and whilst the file Primi was long theorized to potentially be a team-up of the Pokemon Plusle and Minun, it's now more commonly accepted as being a shortening for the Japanese for every player, likely meaning it's data for the random character button on the select screen. Out of what's left, we first have both Toon Zelda and Toon Sheik, which people have theorized were supposed to be Wind Waker's incarnation of Zelda and her disguised form Tetra. And I say theorized because whilst the file names can still be found, the files themselves are completely empty, and Sakurai has never commented on the character's planned inclusion either. This is mostly just a logical guess based on Toon Link being modeled after Wind Waker's incarnation of the character. The last member of the Forbidden 7 is Dixie, which pretty evidently is referencing Dixie Kong, and this one we actually have an explanation from Sakurai for. Originally, she was actually supposed to be part of a tag team with Diddy Kong, with the pair constantly following each other in a similar manner to how you can switch between playing as them in Donkey Kong Country 2. But they apparently ran into technical issues trying to implement the idea, and in the end decided to cut Dixie and make Diddy a solo character, which has remained the case ever since. As for why they never tried to make Dixie work as a solo character, either in Brawl or both of its sequels, I have no clue. With the Forbidden 7 out of the way, we still have a handful of characters that were also planned to be in Brawl. And to start off this group, we'll look at what I'd argue is the weirdest pick with Nintendog, which was dropped due to feeling it was just too unfitting for a fighting game character, leading to its eventual role as an assist trophy, with similar justifications also being made as to why they passed over characters like Pac-Man, the Animal Crossing villager, and Mies, with Nintendog likely never getting the promotion the others did because Well, it's just a regular puppy, you can't really do much with that. Plus, Smash would eventually get a dog character anyway with Duck Hunt. Next, we've got what is arguably the most infamous cut character with Super Mario RPG's Geno, who Sakurai stated he was actually fairly interested in due to his popularity among Smash fans at the time and feeling he could work well within the game. Whilst we don't know what exactly happened that caused Geno to get dropped, the most widely believed explanation is that they couldn't get the rights from Square Enix to include him, and once they could sort out deals to include Square franchises, they likely decided it was more important to get some of the most popular characters from two of the biggest RPG franchises of all time over a character who only appeared in one Mario spin-off that's currently on the verge of turning 30. Though, given the Mario RPG Switch remake and fan support for Geno not dying off, maybe he has a chance in a hypothetical Smash 6. Or maybe they'll add Mallow just to fuck with people. Then we've got two fighters that are in a similar bag to Clefairy, where they were rejected in favor of other characters from the same franchise, one fittingly being another Pokemon with Blastoise, who was originally planned to be part of the Pokemon Trainers team, before later getting swapped out for Squirtle due to providing the team a more balanced size scale, as opposed to the original plan of 2 heavyweights and 1 medium-sized member, along with helping represent all stages of a Pokemon's evolutionary line. The other fighter that fixed that category, along with being our last Brawl reject, is Crystal from Star Fox, who was mostly dropped due to a mix of time constraints and the fact that they couldn't save time by reusing assets from Fox and Falco on her, leading them to go with Wolf instead, who was actually the last character added to Brawl, only being put in alongside Toon Link and Jigglypuff after the game was delayed so they could include Sonic. So given how last minute the addition must have been, it makes sense Crystal lost out due to not being able to make a completely new character from scratch within that short of a time frame, with her likely not being added in afterwards due to Smash 4 releasing in the Star Fox drought and Ultimate prioritizing more popular picks. To kick off the only multi-platform Smash game, kind of, we have a theoretical character inclusion based off of leftover data people managed to find within the files for the Wii U version, namely an unused emblem for the Rhythm Heaven series, suggesting it was supposed to get either a fighter or a stage, though there's not enough to definitively say either whom or where exactly it was, with the common belief being that the chorus kids were planned, based on a series of leaks on the gaming website Gamatsu that managed to correctly guess several of Smash 4's newcomers. Again, it should be stressed there's no proof of how true these leaks are, and we have basically nothing else to work off of. Moving on from the one grey area, we've got 3 more which have been confirmed by Sakurai. The first of these being Takamaru, the main protagonist of the mysterious Murasame Castle, who was ultimately made an assist trophy due to a lack of relevance. Or in other terms, despite personally liking the character, Sakurai acknowledged that most people nowadays likely don't know who he is, especially since he was only in one NES game that didn't even release outside Japan until it was put on the 3DS eShop. After that is Tekken's Heihachi Mishima, who was initially cut due to the team feeling his moveset was just too complicated to properly implement, which given Smash 4 was home to the team's first attempt at making a traditional fighting game rep with Ryu, and even then he was saved for the second wave of DLC, I can believe they weren't fully sure how to incorporate a 3D fighting game character yet. They would consider Heihachi again when they decided to add a Tekken rep for Ultimate's second fighter pass, though he would end up getting passed over again for his son Kazuya, as they felt his double gene powers made him more unique and in turn gave him better moveset potential. To end off Smash 4, we have a similar case to Melee's hunt for a one-off NES character, though this time it was the decision of who to add as the representative for the Final Fantasy series, though in the end they failed to find one they could actually justify choosing over Cloud, who is without question the most iconic and popular Final Fantasy protagonist by a country mile. Again, we don't have the full list of every character that was considered, but Sakurai did mention a couple of them as examples, with Bart's Klauser and Tara Branford, the main protagonists of Final Fantasies 5 and 6 respectively. Hopefully, if this is a sign of anything, maybe this means entries other than 7 can get represented in a new game. We've now arrived at what's currently the last game in the series with Ultimate, which, given as mentioned earlier, the whole selling point was that it featured nearly every highly requested character at the time. Most of the scrapped fighters fit under the category of being dropped in favor of someone else from the same series. The first of these being Castlevania's Alucard, who was made an assist trophy due to the team feeling that, despite him being the most popular protagonist in the series, Castlevania fans would prefer someone from the Belmont clan as the franchise's first fighter, hence why we got Simon and Richter instead. In my opinion, if that was the only thing stopping him from being added, I'd say he probably has the best chances of being added in the next game, with the only potential limiting factor being if for some reason Konami turned the offer down. Next up, we have our last Pokemon of the day with Decidueye, who ended up losing the battle as the representative for the 7th generation of Pokemon to Incineroar. The main reason cited being that Sakurai preferred adding a character archetype that hadn't been featured in Smash before with Incineroar's pro wrestler persona, compared to Decidueye, whose use of a bow and arrow had already been done before with the Lynx and Pits. And given Smash's current track record of adding Pokemon, their chance of being added has come and gone, unless they ever decide to add new characters that aren't from whatever the newest generation at the time is, or Gen 1. Then we've got our only other grey area character with the Dragon Quest Slime, who is effectively just the backup option in the event Square didn't let them use Hero, and since they did, the Slimes instead got cameos on the Dragon Quest stage and some of Hero's animations. To be honest, and to go off script for a bit, I actually have a few friends that are into Dragon Quest, and they were actually a bit confused as to why they went with Hero over Slime, so I'm a bit curious to know how anyone else feels about this situation. Anyway, after that was Ninjara, who for a while was competing with Min Min over who should be the ARMS representative, with the dilemma getting resolved in probably the most straightforward way possible, which was that ARMS producer, Kosuke Yabuki, specifically requested that they add Min Min. Not really much else to say there, hard to really challenge the word of the original game's producer. And for our last character of the day, and the only one from Ultimate that wasn't cut in favor of someone else, we have Rex from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, who originally was supposed to be part of a team alongside Pirate and Mithra, in a similar fashion to the Ice Climbers, though in addition to Rex having different moves, you could still switch out Pirate and Mithra. Long story short, the team kept running into technical issues trying to implement the idea, so it was decided instead to just have Pyra and Mithra as the fighter, with Rex popping up for some of the pair's animations, similar to the previously mentioned Slime. God, our only one that wasn't just a character getting replaced by another one from another franchise is a repeat of Dixie Kong. And that's every rejected Smash Bros. Fighter. If there's anyone from this bunch that you'd want to see be given a chance in the ring, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Personally, I'd root for Alucard, Slime, and then just anyone from Final Fantasy that's not from 7. Seriously, that game has 16 mainline entries, why are they only pulling from the most popular one? Until next time though, thanks for watching.